So I think we all remember when pixel art kind of became popular again in the zeitgeist, when more indie devs were coming up and more people who grew up with that stuff were kind of getting into game development. They kind of brought this art style along, pixel art. And now I think almost, a large chunk, 60%, 70% of indie games use pixel art in some aspects. I'm pretty sure it could even be more than that, honestly. But it also makes sense because it's a lot more approachable in order to start working with, and you maybe don't need as many like tools or whatever. You just really need a computer and a mouse, and honestly, you can do it in MS Paint. There's other programs and such, but nonetheless. And now I think we're starting to see the 3D equivalent of that for indie games and other games in the gaming space with low-poly art that kind of looks like, PS1 and 64, very pixelated as well. But you can kind of see that now, and I just want to talk about it. So for me, I personally prefer kind of doing this art style. And initially, I think, if you make game assets, if you make this kind of stuff, it's a lot easier, to, have something with less polys and to kind of focus on a texture. And the texture doesn't even need to be that great. It can be blurry, it can be fuzzy to kind of hit that old art style, but it also can just speed up like modern development because our modern stuff can just make this stuff so much easier. So, that's obviously an aspect to why I kind of started to fall into it. But, I grew up with Nintendo 64 and PlayStation 1 stuff. As a kid, I really didn't like it. I didn't really care about it. I actually wanted the better stuff, the new stuff. PS2 and when like the 360 and stuff came out, it was way better and way more interesting to me and exciting. And so I really just didn't care for these like lower graphics, these lesser graphics, until I kind of started to make this stuff. There's this thing that happens, and I don't know if it has a name or something like the something effect, but it's this thing I've heard where it's essentially the things you didn't like as a kid, you kind of like it when you're older, or maybe you have a better chance at liking it when you're older because it's like part of your childhood. And I think low poly stuff, PS1 and N64 specifically, kind of hits that for me, where I actually really didn't like it as a kid, but now I love it. And in fact, I like it way more than like realism. You see, the thing is, when a new game kind of comes out, maybe it's an indie game or a AAA thing, if I kind of see it just using like realism and stuff again, I don't care too much. Maybe it's just because it's been so much more overdone. But I find it is a little bit more, or I guess a little less interesting in the sense that, you're just replicating what you see. You're not like being creative with constraints to try to capture what you see, but in a lesser style. Starting out, I think the first time I kind of saw this stuff was with a guy named Art of Sully, or I think Brendan Sullivan or something. And he kind of did this early mixture of like low poly and pixel art, but a little bit more in the pixel art direction, where the stuff kind of looked like 3D pixel art as opposed to an old game. And it was super cool to see that stuff. I was very inspired by it and kind of started down this path of trying to replicate or do that kind of artwork. Eventually, of course, the road leads down to, making PS1 graphics, making N64 graphics, and then making PS1 projects and N64 style projects. Because I grew up with that stuff now, it's nostalgic to me and endearing to me. So, that also adds to it. The more I delved into it, the more I've kind of had that nostalgic pull to do even more of it, honestly. But I think that's a big thing for a lot of these developers who are making this stuff. My generation has grown up and now is making games, and they want to make games that are nostalgic to them, especially in a timeline where everything's kind of rough or crappy or something, So with this stuff being said, though, a lot of my early kind of art from this looked a lot like the Brendan Sullivan stuff. It was not really pushing into a different direction. It was very kind of copying that. And then I kind of remembered / looked into more of Mega Man Legends and how super appealing that art style is. I did a piece where I kind of remade the model for Mega Man Legends And I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the philosophies behind the model and how it approached things. That I think I did another one that kind of looked like that style, or I did a couple more, and people were saying like it looks kind of like that style. I forget when it really was, but I think it was when someone reached out for a commission to kind of match that style. And ever since then, a lot of my stuff has just gone in that direction, and I'm super there for it. I remember talking to someone about it, like the way I draw and have been drawing kind of leading up to this pretty much hits the same like design philosophies of like big legs, small body, small waist, more feminine properties to the character, big head. Just because leading up to this kind of moment where I started doing these things, like I was just like, I'm just gonna draw what I like to draw, and it just so happened that it like kind of fits perfectly with this art style of Mega Man Legends specifically, that I just kind of started pursuing it. Luckily, I think I picked a low poly kind of retro art style that really resonates with people. I think there's a couple of like PS1 and 64 kind of styles you can look at and kind of still hold up, you find very endearing, or that can be pushed further and people really enjoy it. I think, you have Mega Man Legend, obviously one. I think Metal Gear Solid is a really good style to approach like kind of quote unquote realism in that era. I think, if you're going N64, Smash Bros, or like Super Mario, and especially like Ocarina of Time, those elements, I've seen a couple of like projects now mimicking Legend of Zelda specifically. Shout out Legend 64, I think is the project and the channel's name. That one specifically is Zelda and Ocarina of Time specifically. And I think the PlayStation 1 maybe has potentially less endearment towards some of its games, characters, models, styles as such. They had a lot more like kind of trying to cram realism into it, and it really didn't work a lot of the time, so it could look a little fugly. I think people are kind of being less harsh about it lately, though. I think there's a lot of, like a ton of endearment for PS1 specifically as well. I think moving forward, it'll actually, continue to evolve. The people that grew up with the PS2 art styles, they will start to make PS2 art styles and PS2 style games. And the kind of art and styles I can totally see from that era is definitely like JRPG stuff, action RPG stuff. So like Kingdom Hearts is the main one. I think that'll be huge. And I think we're just kind of waiting for a really strong art direction that's kind of pursuing that style and that, especially that feeling. I've seen a lot more like Kingdom Hearts things. I think Geno Kids is what it's called, is a big one right now that's taking that influence, and there's obviously tons. Luminous Realms is another one, I believe it's called. So there's those. I think, keeping with Square, Final Fantasy X and like Final Fantasy XII are also going to be art styles that people heavily pursue, where you kind of put almost too much detail into textures, and it creates this really cool look. You go very painterly with it. I know it's not like PlayStation 2, but like World of Warcraft kind of has that style too, where it's like really heavy on the painted textures. I think Sly Cooper will be another big one as well, because it was really kind of seemingly first really big one that people point out, where it's like the comic book art style is so true with it. Yeah, so I think those are some. If there's more, like if people think that there's some big ones coming down the line where we'll start seeing a lot of indie artists use that art style, let me know. I know for like PlayStation 1, there's also like Spyro the Dragon, I think is pretty huge, especially with like maybe the furry community as well. I think Final Fantasy, I forgot to mention, like Final Fantasy 7, I can see that, but also 8, definitely. So, it's kind of up in the air. And then this kind of bleeds into another kind of low poly system, which was the PSP and the DS. Those systems, I think, me personally, I forget about it all the time, but they kind of had that PlayStation 1 art style, especially the PSP, but, a little bit extra. Like, I think the indie games that we say, oh, this is like the PS1 inspired game, will actually look kind of more like the PSP games or like the DS games. For the DS, sometimes it would struggle. It would really chunk along to get that 3D. And in fact, I really hated the 3D for the DS when I was a kid. I was like, don't do 3D, because I really like Pokemon Diamond and stuff, and those games, the pixel art was immaculate. That when they started pursuing the 3D stuff, and it was just like so much worse. It was like you go from the best of pixel art to the lamest of low poly. I like hated it, but now obviously I look at it and go like, I love this so much. And there's so many good looking DS games and amazing projects on the system. Personally, with my stuff and my models, I've been commissioning them more. A good amount of like VTubers are kind of starting to get into low poly. I think there's a guy named Dupler64 or something. He does a lot of it, and he's super good, really inspiring. Falcon Trace is like another one, and I've been seeing that a little bit more. So obviously it goes back to the nostalgia thing where people grew up with this now kind of want to create more art and share that art style. So it's really cool to see. It'll probably get a little oversaturated in like 5-ish years, 6 years or something. And, there'll be a project that like, I think really shoots it into the stratosphere, maybe perhaps like Shovel Knight did with pixel art. I don't know if that's not correct to say or something, but like there's usually, one project that really shoots it off and then it, kind of peters out or something like that, I think with the projects though, like maybe this is more of just a topic of like retro game projects, but I think it'll be interesting to kind of see games with these graphics playing really good, because I know like older games are really rough to play. So that is an element that is like, oh, just you can go back and play those games. It's like, it's kind of hard because like they play like crap. Like really imagine a game that, plays as good as say like new Spider-Man or Bloodborne. That's one, the Bloodborne PS1, right? That guy's making Bloodborne PS1, but like really like besides the graphics and the overall art direction, have a good camera, have, a not like slow, clunky animations, have like really nice animations. And we're seeing that, with a lot of these indie projects, but I think we'll just see more of that. And I think it's a really interesting place to explore. It's basically like the old art and old direction in with like, the things that can enhance that players won't really notice. Like if I think it was the Shovel Knight guys. It was the Shovel Knight guys that said like they wanted to make a game that felt like how people remembered Nintendo games, NES games to be. And that's huge. I think that's such a good philosophy. Make a game that people think the gameplay does. Because a lot of time, like I played GoldenEye 64 recently on a 64. Holy hell, that game is so bad to play. Like the clunk is so powerful. Super fun, super funny still. But like, man, like controls and stuff is like just holy moly. And that's an example of like, oh, I remember this game playing so good back in the day, and then you actually play it and it's like really bad feeling compared to modern stuff. So if you have this game that looks like an old game or a style that looks like an old art style, but the gameplay wrapped around it is super duper, that's fantastic, of course. So I'm excited to see more projects like that, honestly, and I'm always looking into those. As much as maybe I'll play them and feel envious or something like that, it's still really cool to see. I love to see it.